And mental health. So this is a panel proposed by Knut, Tim and Chris to discuss their personal experiences of working within the organisational culture of the mental health sector. The beautiful murmurations of starlings are formed by individual starlings learning the moves from each other to fly in formation, creating flowing, synchronised patterns above their feeding grounds to appear as one collective body to ward off predators. And hand over now to Knut Torcello.
Thank you. I'll try to attach this. Good morning, I'm Knut. I'm from Norway. Hopefully I can make myself understood. Please let me know if I'm talking too low or say stuff that isn't understandable. And here we go. I was reluctant when Chris first shared his thoughts on doing a panel together. I was surprised and flattered, but his initial idea, doing something on masculinity, made me more worried than if the panel was to revolve around something else, which it kind of did in the end. I find it challenging to think of my own experiences in terms of how I got to be me, because I find myself always uncertain. I find it difficult to even remember much of what has happened and what I thought of it at the time, and even more so, to pinpoint one thing that led to another. And in terms of masculinity, being a man, I've never felt certain what that means, apart from being me, who happens to be considered one in many ways. I like to think of myself as a late bloomer, yet close to 50 years old, my biggest worry is whether I bloom at all. After 12 years of primary school, I was so sick and tired that any further studies were out of the question, and one leap year turned into 6. I started my bachelor's in nursing at the age of 25, mostly due to pragmatics and circumstances beyond my control, without any grand plan or direction ahead. Yet for the first time for a long while, I find myself enjoying studies and reading. I'm not quite sure how I ended up working in a forensic mental health ward, but that was when the link between masculinity and forensic psychiatry was to be discovered. More specifically, that we, for reasons that weren't crystal clear, always were supposed to be 70% male staff on the ward. I gradually realized that this had to do with what one could call muscle power, which I never had in abundance. I still remember my gym teacher in the 8th grade yelling at me for not managing one single pull-up, no matter how hard I tried. He made it seem a human oddity that one single pull-up was out of reach. For a boy in an age where one, according to the ideal, at least the one presented to me back then, should gradually be turning into a man, this sort of special attention from my gym teacher was not what the doctor ordered. I've never had any success in team sports like football or handball either. I rather felt like the odd boy out, never managing to keep up with my teammates, and my experiences were far from anything that qualifies as murmuration. Team sports are forever connected to defeat, shame, and failure. Back on the psychiatric track, the forensic ward was opening a few months after I finished my Bachelor of Nursing, and I now found myself somehow representing muscles. Prior to the grand opening, we all had to attend a mandatory 2-day course, meant to prepare us for what lay ahead. I can't say I remember much, but what I do remember is one of my future colleagues, without any notice, grabbing me by my semi-long hair, asking me how to get out of this grip. I choose to believe his intentions were good. He was older and far more experienced than myself, and probably wanted to share his hard-earned insights. Nonetheless, I can't shake off the sense of him resembling one of the numerous bouncers that seemed to find great joy in telling me I needed some fresh air during my leap years. Tan, with a chest looking like it had gotten its hours of strain in the gym, a solid gold chain around his neck and large gold rings on his fingers, bleached hair. Nothing wrong with any of that, yet I cannot help to think that he somehow represents some kind of masculinity that I never have found myself relating to or comfortable with. Prejudice, obviously, Yet the guy confirmed all my initial thoughts and proved me right. He was a moron. Yet, during the course, he came across with some kind of authority, and in hindsight, he was probably some kind of heads up on parts of what my future on the ward would be like. And speaking of late blooming, I have a confession to make. These days, I find great joy in reading the works of Deleuze and Guattari. I can't claim I understand it all, not even close. Yet, I find great inspiration in reading their work. I kind of find an answer to almost everything in their writings, probably a sign of being on the wrong track. I'm pretty sure they didn't have a panel on institutionalized care in mind when they wrote what I'm about to recite. Yet, to me, the quote summarizes parts of what I have already touched upon, whether it being the worst player on a football team or a whimsical, newly graduated nurse among muscular bouncer-like colleagues on a forensic ward. I am on the edge of the crowd, at the periphery, but I belong to it. I'm attached to it by one of my extremities, a hand or a foot. I know that the periphery is the only place I can be, that I would die if I let myself be drawn into the center of the fray, but just as certainly if I let go of the crowd. This is not an easy position to stay in. It is even difficult to hold, for these beings are in constant motions and their movements are unpredictable and follow no rhythm. They swirl, go north, then suddenly east. None of the individuals in the crowd remains in the same place in relation to the others. So I too am in perpetual motion. I do feel an urge to emphasize, not all of my colleagues on that forensic ward were morons. Some of them are fabulous, people with great integrity and insights from whom I learned a lot. A few I consider some of my best friends even today, over 15 years after I quit. I'm not trying to say that I was the only person who had the answers or understood it all. Yet, when I think back, a great portion of what I was part of troubles me to a great extent. And I think what troubles me is some kind of herd mentality, a bit like Starling Murmuration, that we were supposed to act as some kind of homogeneous mass without hesitation. We were the ones in charge, running the show. In some instances, okay, even necessary, yet in others it seemed wrong, back then and even more so today. I do struggle a bit with the idea of epiphanies, at least understood as one crucial moment when the lights turned on or everything changed. My experience is that most often several random, unplanned and seemingly meaningless things in life nudge me in one direction or the other. Not until later can I find some kind of meaning and common thread in these random experiences. I do, however, argue that one of the things that made a huge impact on me and keeps on doing it today took place in the room equipped with a bed with restraint belts. One of the patients, a man much older than myself, who had experienced all kinds of wrongdoings during his long stays in various institutions, refused to return his Visa card after leaving the ward to go shopping. And house rules stated that no patient was allowed to keep credit cards on the ward in case of them escaping. Like I already mentioned, he had experienced all kinds of wrongdoings and inflicted some on others. I don't think this was an epiphany for him, the moment he would have pinpointed as the one when everything went down the drain. Yet the situation that arose felt more than unreasonable, out of proportion and outrageous. According to routines, every staff available was to gather if the alarm went off, voices got louder, or some situation was on the rise. So we did. Despite repeated attempts at persuading him to hand over his credit card, he refused. He got more agitated by the minute. Now he kept his card in his mouth, refusing to open it. And, as one could imagine, removing a credit card from a closed mouth is no easy task, even when muscles are abundant. I found the whole thing surreal. Why was this even a problem? Sooner or later, that credit card would have found its way out of his mouth. If he had wanted to leave the ward, he probably would have done so when he was out shopping alone with his credit card. At this point, he was locked up, with us. There was no rhyme or reason for why getting hold of that credit card was of the utmost importance. At the edge of the crowd, so to speak, I discreetly asked one of my colleagues why this whole thing was necessary, why we needed to escalate this any further. We obviously were. Why not wait for the whole thing to solve itself? For obvious reasons, he wasn't going to swallow the card. The reply wasn't reassuring. The one giving it wasn't even the bouncer-like fellow from the course. And what my colleague said was that when I had worked there long enough, I would understand why getting hold of that card was crucial. At this point, the staff in charge probably said something like, "You need to calm down and do as you're told, or we will help you." When the day shift ended, my stomach was in knots. The patient was in restraint belts. The problem with murmuration, as far as I can see it, is much of what Deleuze and Guattari point out. Even though you find yourself in the periphery, you cannot just fly your own way in the heat of the moment. I felt ashamed then, I'm ashamed now. To call this murmuration would be an insult to Starlings. I do find some kind of comfort in the fact that later during his long stay at the ward, I was assigned to be his primary contact, and was so for a year and a half. I remember him yelling threats, beautifully portrayed in a language I could never imagine, a wizard with words. Once, our noses were physically touching and my ears were ringing from the sheer volume. But I also recall long conversations. He shared stories from his time at the hospital when he was a young man, or rather a boy, during the 1970s. I learned more about life from those talks than I ever did from many of my colleagues. I have more confessions to make. I'm also reading Foucault these days. Discipline and Punish, The Birth of the Prison. And there are so many connections and parallels between prisons, panopticons, forensic wards, and psychology. Yet, I also find his take on history fascinating. And be warned, this is amateur evening. Foucault claims that when different practices and malpractices emerge, like, for instance, schools, prisons, and psychology, there isn't necessarily some conspiracy or mastermind behind it. Rather, diverse and complex conditions and reasons for something to happen at one point in history converge. But the whole thing could have turned out in numerous ways. This resonates with my own life. Laws and regulations, the ward culture I was part of, being a male nurse, and things I'm not aware of, they all led to me being part of something that I never anticipated. I quit after 5 years. I didn't work there long enough to understand why we needed to get hold of that card. I still don't, and I'd be more worried if I had. The building where the ward was located, part of an old asylum from the 1920s, is now gone, transformed into fancy flats for people to live in. The flock and its practices, however, are, at least as far as I know, doing its thing elsewhere.
Before I start, a quick explanatory note for anybody who's not from the UK or possibly Canada. A community treatment order is something which is issued to a mental health patient on discharge from hospital, or can be issued on discharge from hospital, which allows the patient be returned to hospital if they refuse to accept treatment at home or forcibly returned for treatment. Okay. 20 years and 10 jobs in mental health in approximately 8 minutes. I came into this line of work through my struggles to keep my shit together. I threw the cakes across the restaurants and stormed out of commercial catering to take a job with the local mental health trust as a housekeeper. I worked in my hometown and I saw people I knew. I saw a friend berated and belittled into becoming the shell of himself that he is today. On Christmas Day, I turned up to cook the dinner. He was missing. Had he gone home, I asked? No. He'd refused medication and being sent to another unit as a result to prevent him disrupting other patients. Later, now working as a catering supervisor and cook at Trust headquarters, I bumped into someone in town who told me that her son was an inpatient and he would like a visitor. I remembered him sneering at me when he threw half a brick at my head after school one time. I thought, how was my presence going to help? I'll give it a miss. Fast forward a couple of weeks, he was on the news and the chance had passed forever. I don't think this was on my mind when I went to see about secondment into nurse education. I just saw the chance to get the degree I failed to acquire at Aberdeen, making good out of redundancy from my catering job. But once I got out and saw a bit more of what was going on, how people were living and what futures were expected for them, I think those other events took on more significance, especially when I got to working with young people. The approach felt rushed and risk-averse with normative values, more so as we came into NHS systems from local authority ownership. It had taken me over a decade, some very patient and caring people, and a fair amount of good luck to get myself into some form of serviceable shape and start making decisions about my life with some sense of purpose again, rather than just survival. No rough saying, right? Scene from practice 1. I stand in a kitchenette with a cardboard dish on the top of the microwave in which sits a vial of Clopixol. It's a bugger to draw up on a cold day like this, despite having sat rolling it between my hands for a good 10 minutes. I hate this part of the job, although I knew it would be part of it. I didn't expect there to be so many depots. I mean, this is early intervention, supposedly. This guy's been on this stuff for a year now, since discharge from the unit. He's piled on weight and has stopped doing, well, anything much. I've appealed to the consultant for a review of his diagnosis. After all, he was smoking ounces of weed when he was admitted. She won't budge. He's now officially schizophrenic and incurable. Needs a lifetime supply of intramuscular psychotropic substances to stop him thinking weird things, or anything. We had a plan, his mum and I. We had a support worker, we were buying from the GP, but our guy's lost his motivation. The consultant blames it on negative symptoms. It's funny how they seem to correlate with the introduction of his depot and the return home from the ward on a community treatment order, rather than the rehab unit that we were promised. I put on gloves, take a yellow needle and attach it to the syringe. Break the top off the vial and draw up the thick liquid with an effort. If you let go before taking the tip of the needle out, the viscosity is such that it sucks the Clopixol back into the vial. I remove the yellow needle and deposit it in the sharps bin, resting the syringe on the tray. I take a green needle and screw it on. I call our man into the kitchen, take the syringe out in my gloved hand. Which side is it this week? I ask him. He can't remember. I check the medication chart. Left, I say. Thought so, he says. He drops his trousers and exposes a heavy buttock. I know that after this, we'll probably go to a nearby cafe, get a coffee and perhaps chat about Christmas shopping or films we've seen. We used to talk about his college work and the work he did on his uncle's boat. Nurse educator. We sit around a huge table, about 10 of us. Module leaders, programme directors, intake leads and the academic lead for nursing programmes. We're developing a new curriculum. Commanding view of the West Campus can be seen through the panoramic window of the meeting room in the medical building. A large, expensive, defective bauble for use on open days to impress the parents. I work from the boot of my car. To me, this context seems to be a contrived attempt to remind us of the hierarchy extant in nursing programmes. We, of the small fields, would do well to remember who the real nurses are. As a first-year nursing student, I stood up and corrected a lecturer on food hygiene, chastened by students around me from the adult field for interrupting the lecturer. My catering experience was not welcome. I listened to the specialist programmes being reduced to passing comments and received wisdoms. I suggest alternatives. A riposte to new ideas is Isn't that what we already do on insert module here? Our students already feel marginalised and silenced in core lectures, as I do in these meetings. A punishment is meted out when I dare to question or make a suggestion of doing things differently. A brief silence, a person of standing pats me on the head and insinuates that I haven't thought through what I'm saying. Other more learned persons talk amongst themselves about the thing they were talking about before, without further reference to my remark or suggestion. We need mental health input in the curriculum, I am told. The Nursing and Midwifery Council, the regulatory body for nurses in the UK, has dictated that there should be an understanding of common mental disorders and treatments. I believe this would be a good idea, if only they did understand the insubstantial nature of mental health diagnoses and their point of origin, the brutality and harm engendered by many treatments, and the lack of evidence for their efficacy, not to mention the corruption which has blighted this evidence base. Alas, what is required by our superiors is a list of disorders and their symptoms, and what to do with typical cases. Oh, and mental health first aid. To try and illustrate the difference between the fields, I end up weakly appealing to policy. This, I think, is at least something the others might be aware of. It turns out they are. They now want to have a core lecture on the 5-year forward view for mental health to be delivered to 300 students in an hour. Practice scene 2. She sits in a big leather sofa of a pristine white East Riding Village's designer new build home, immaculately made up and dressed in designer clothing. It's the back end of exam season, and this young woman has 2 to go. She tells us about the feeling of being watched, followed, and talked about, which has marked her recent days at college and at home. She is being watched at home, in fact. There's a significant level of pressure being exerted to do well in these exams and to move on to college. Coming from a family of self-made entrepreneurs, she is expected to follow the family philosophy as much as she helps with the family business, between study and her job at the salon. When we get to talking about work, she visibly relaxes, loafing back in her seat and casting her eyes up, re-entering the sensory world of the salon. She's been offered an apprenticeship by the manager, who's told her she has potential with a good attitude to the work. It's not clear whether this is an official accredited apprenticeship, and we are sceptical. As 2 accredited professionals who have both had to work hard to get to the position we now occupy, we begin to stress the importance of education, certification, and aspiration. I've never thought of myself in these terms, tending to portray myself as rebellious, when in fact, I love us medal as much as the next Mutley. I'm actually aware in most of my work with this client group that my lack of achievement at their age cost me a decade in recovery time. But in this room on this day, I'm not paying attention. I'm scared for this young woman not seeing the life experience and self-knowledge she is demonstrating in her responses to our questions. She's way ahead of me. Not seeing how she is following a path towards security for her own mental health and developing sense of identity. I've gone deaf to what I'm being told as I search for some other meaning which aligns with my wishes at 40 for myself at 17. I've sat with families who told me they just wanted things back how they were. They just want little Jimmy or Jenny exactly as he or she was before, back to normal. There's a tyranny in that sentiment, Lang has suggested. The nurses, right, were associated with restitution. There are a great many problems with this idea, but it's the notion of going back that troubles me. It's probably not advisable to go back, if that's the route that led you to a psychosis service. Perhaps better to go elsewhere.
Talk amongst yourselves.
It'll be fine on here.
Yeah?
It's
Oh,
a
okay.
good microphone.
This piece is called Product, but that's not Yeah, that's what it's called. As manager of an employment charity based in an NHS mental health outpatients, I was allocated a large wooden desk, a bureau with drawers, solid, old school and dependable. The desk was symbolic of taking myself seriously in a new way that integrated a leadership role I'd previously had a problem with. When I first started in this profession, my social anxiety was sky high, about to meet service users for the first time. I walked over to a group sitting in uncomfortable silence in a circle of high wingback chairs. One white woman picked at a thread on her sleeve, while another in a head wrap stared straight through me, then craned her neck to get back her view of some traumatic memory I was blocking. Finally, I made eye contact. A thin man's puppy eyes ran up to meet me, but then ran away in fright. It turned out these were the psychotherapists. I had the wrong room. In my first caseload review meeting with the community mental health team, which comprised of psychiatrists, social workers, psychologists, psychiatric nurses, we're all crowded around a boardroom table, and each case that's discussed is presented to the team as a story. So staff will begin. This is a gentleman in his 50s who's recently made two suicide attempts since his incapacity benefits were cut. This is a woman in her 30s with a history of bulimia. The mood was caring and intimate, ethical social care in action. The next week, the boardroom table for the same meeting, caseload meeting, was filled with M&S petal-shaped party dips, cold meat selections, quiches and cartons of orange juice, all courtesy of the pharmaceutical company's chemically peeled sales rep, promoting its new blister-packed mood stabilizer. At the centre of this drug lunch is Cordelia, the haute-coutured head psychiatrist, today dressed down to imitate social sameness, as it's a team event. As Cordelia looks over the spread, Jeanette, her faithful psychiatric nurse, second guesses it's the dip she's after, but Cordelia waves her away with a flash of a thin smile. Psychiatrists no longer need to wear white coats to elicit deference. Psychiatry requires a further 4 years of study after qualifying as medical doctors. The memorizing of anatomy then shifts focus from the body to the head. Only the wealthy can usually afford the fees and enter this elite profession, whose dubious scientific claims of restoring chemical balance in the brain has triumphed over holistic social care. Psychiatry exists primarily to deliver the worried well and the long-term sick to big pharma. One morning I saw two silent 7-year-old twins dressed in neat matching white dresses, socks and shiny shoes, eerily standing at the end of the corridor. Only the very wealthy, I'm rereading the wrong thing. At the end of the corridor. Cordelia, it turned out, had brought her shining children into the office that day. They wandered next door to Jeanette's desk, picking through the jumble of pharma freebies. I overheard one of the twins ask their mummy, "If you're the head of the hospital, what is Jeanette?" Cordelia, after some thought, pulling on a professional memory, gave her considered answer, "She's the neck, darling." Anyway, the NHS has a strict dress code for staff. Nothing sexually alluring that might excite patients, but there's no rule about unobtainable wealth flaunted at the broke medicated crowd waiting for a hot meal outside the social centre. These are grey, grown-up waifs from the musical Oliver as Cordelia sachets past, dazzling in a peach fit and flare silk dress with puff sleeves and matching Prada handbag. Her mood is upbeat. She could have danced all night, but it was just another sit-down dinner. Cordelia swerves past the glaziers sweeping up smashed glass as usual by the security door, while a 21st century Bill Sykes leers through his chemical fog as Cordelia swans past. I'm in a triage meeting with Jeanette and Cordelia, reviewing my client Aaron's recovery from a bipolar episode that had him hospitalized. Cordelia asked me if Aaron is work ready. I turned to Aaron for him to answer for himself, but there's silence except for his manic flip-flop tapping on the floor. He's wearing a charity shop dress over his jeans. Cordelia, in her reasonable flat tone, walks Aaron through the side effects of the higher dosage: weight gain, tremors, sexual dysfunction, depression, anxiety, and suicidal ideation. Meanwhile, Aaron's eyes flit between us in a reverie at being the centre of attention for once, and pretends he can't read Jeanette's lips that plead, "Aaron, please turn down the music and take the headphones on." In private, Aaron later tells me he can never go back to his mind-numbing job in accounts. He proudly declares he's going to become an artist like Van Gogh, but didn't mention his father, an artist. Aaron's dad actually kept ringing me up, feigning concern for his son's mental health, but kept creeping the focus onto himself. Now his son was the envied centre of attention, he wasn't going to be outdone. He said he needed therapy and could pay someone in paintings. Could I help? Like many clients with emotional trauma, somewhere in the background is either a parent, sibling, boss, colleague, friend, or members of an entitled class whose narcissism usually goes unseen and unchecked, but causes blunt or slow emotional trauma in others. Narcissism is on the spectrum of antisocial personality disorders, often with violent sociopathy and psychopathy at the forensic end, needing detainment or prison. But the mid-range narcissism is socialized and in that sense is more dangerous. The cluster of characteristics essentially coalesce around pathological envy that is expressed as psychological violence that typically results in the killing off of the liveliness in others. I recruited a reliable, committed staff, usually experts by experience, who had previously been service users. Within a year, we had turned around what had been a failing charity to being a success respected by the trust. Strangely, the charity's head office were unsettled by the turnaround and sent their executive director, Liz, to troubleshoot. This is a woman, 50, an ex-nurse with her own horse. She viewed the mental health commissioners, workers, and me as a walkover. She took one look around the calm order of the office, saw my managerial ease sat behind my bureau, and gave her bitter verdict: "Get rid of that desk!" Her intent to negate and disrupt was very PD, personality disorder, shorthand for trouble, and sent her dazed assistant micromanager, who's even shorter than she is, to oversee and undermine me once a week for 6 months as my punishment. Society exerts a lot of pressure for us to take flight as a fixed, unified self, appearing to be visibly one persona. This murmuration often takes its toll on our mental health, throwing us and everybody else up in the air. The NHS appointed Jonathan as the new hospital efficiency czar. This is a gentleman, 45, whose childhood was spent warehoused in a Gothic boarding school from 8 years old. The trauma of abandonment by his parents and the taboo hate towards them, swallowed down in childhood, is then vomited up in adult public life over the lives of others who seem to have had it easy living at home or show up as repulsively weak. This is currently expressed as austerity cuts. Austerity is a privileged class project, essentially, to further undermine the vulnerable and kill off any possibility of stability and care this class were denied growing up. Not all, but most, some. Anyway, Jonathan is a tall white NHS lanyard-wearing lycra cyclist. New imposed, his first meet and greet tour of his team was more like an official royal inspection. Jonathan put his head round the door and noted my desk and me sitting behind it, but mainly the desk. Later, I went to his office about a client case. He didn't remember who I was, even though we had only met a few hours ago. I noticed his desk was smaller than mine and expected trouble. Jonathan's first action in post was to bring in hot desking. Now we had to queue up to get a squeeze on a desk. People's personal belongings, our home-from-home comforts, framed pictures of loved ones, pot plants, and other humanizing touches were dumped in boxes, our working lives depersonalized and disrupted to mirror Jonathan's disordered, jumpy inner life. Starlings form murmurations to ward off predators that they can recognise. We humans, unfortunately, often cannot distinguish predators among our own species and are sometimes unaware we are communing with predatory people and institutions who appear to be travelling with us in the same ethical and emotional direction. Thank you.
Okay, wow, thank you all. Some powerful scenes. Hearts up a bit. Thanks for the laughs as well, alongside that. Very needed few moments of humour as well. So we've got just over 20 minutes, plenty of time for some dialogue and discussion. If anyone has responses, anything you'd like to share, any questions, I'll just repeat them briefly for the online people and then hand over to whoever. Over to you. Can I start? The muscles thing, Knut. Yeah. Just that was so powerful and so freaky that in mental health care, people are hired because of their physical strength.
I think not literally, but that was my interpretation of being a man, and I've never been muscular, obviously. That's been a thing for me, and for some reason that equaled me being muscular. Being a man, you were muscular by numbers, 70% men. And I guess in the presentation, we were more than muscles though, but it was a strange thing that I've never thought about. And of course, things are more nuanced than in a presentation like this, but there were so many expectations connected to being a man in that war, I think it freaked me out a bit. But I guess that goes for society at large as well, to some extent. At least that's what my experience is. That muscles, doing pull-ups, being a winner, that's a main thing for some. So, thank you. Was that an answer?
Yeah, I mean, I'm sort of also just thinking about the credit card, the ridiculousness of it, and wondering where the ridiculousness of muscles, whether that's.
Yeah, and that was the thing, because, like I said, I think this guy had experienced worse things. But to me, the whole thing was so ridiculous, so unnecessary. And when I asked that question, why are we doing this? It's like, we have to. We need to prove we're stronger. Yeah. We're in control, yeah. And that's, even though I worked there, I was part of the Murmuration or whatever, I never managed to think like that, because I didn't want to. I guess, yeah, and I'm happy with that.
Thanks, Knut. We have a question from Beverly from Sheffield to all of you. Do you think any of this will change with the new Labour government?
Did it change with the last Labour government?
No.
So, if Beverly, if you want to come in with a follow-up, please do. But so what can change? What could help?
To me, well, as my presentation was trying to emphasise, it's the dominance of psychiatry connected with big pharmaceutical companies that are just making ridiculous profits out of other people's suffering. And there are very good models, and there are a lot of critics within psychiatry itself who have tried to change the system, but it seems to be getting stronger and stronger. And the fact that GPs are actually complicit with handing out what were antipsychotics developed by psychiatry for people that were severely unwell, are now being repurposed as antidepressants. And all the side effects that go with it. Just make sure you will be numb and out of service for months or possibly years. It's a corporate crime, basically, and there are lots of models, and there are lots of people working within mental health who are very dedicated, are very caring, and understand that it is a holistic process. But unfortunately, as I was trying to emphasise, there's this hierarchy with medicine sitting at the top. So unless they go, nothing's going to change. And also, they have so much money, they can just pay their way through any lawsuits against them, as they do regularly. So.
The institution of psychiatry in this country is yoked to the institution of the NHS, which is a sacred cow. But it's not a health issue in the same way that some other health issues are, perhaps. And where there's a broad and maybe, well, is there a dynamic way of approaching things in public health? There are in some avenues. That within the NHS even, or commissioned service, and in mental health care, it's not so much. So while there are some fantastic alternative models for providing holistic care for people experiencing problems in living, the principal go-to intervention comes from the National Institute for Care and Health Excellence, NICE, who review evidence and then pronounce on what's the most effective treatment for the particular disorder, which the aim of which is to keep everything functioning the way it is. So what am I saying there? The best thing to do would be to dismantle, I think, the apparatus and learn from the past and learn from other places now.
Yeah, and you mentioned NICE, the National...
The National Institute for Care and Health Excellence.
They're complicit in actually burying the research that found that psychotherapy, talking therapy, is actually very effective. And they sort of push that aside because it's not so easily measurable, in sort of neoliberal terms, not so easy to quantify. So they've rolled out this kind of generic, CBT, 6 sessions of CBT, which can help to a certain extent, but people need far more kind of engage one-to-one support a lot of the time. So what seems to be happening is with psychiatrists is actually making people's illnesses something permanent, which relates back to the idea of murmuration, that you're presented as a sick person, which could then become your whole identity. And it's very difficult for people to get out of it once they're in it. I mean, it's really sad.
Can we get Rolf and then...
I'll let you know.
Oh, okay.
Sorry.
Okay, is Alex next in line?
Yeah.
Okay.
Alec, please unmute yourself.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Chris, Knut and Tim. I enjoyed your presentations very much. I've got a couple of observations and I guess a question as an observation. For years, I speak from a position of hyphenated identity, my term, academic, mental health, ex-mental health academic, hyphen system survivor, and hyphen a few other things, autoethnographer. I very much see psychiatry, the whole edifice, as social control. It's not just everything needs dismantling, as Tim says. I think the whole vocabulary needs to change. We still talk in residual conceptual terms about sickness, illness, disorder, etc., based on zero evidence, diagnoses decided by committee consensus in the shape of the DSM, etc. I think there's two points. One is organizations, not just so-called mental health organizations, but bureaucratic organizations, in my view, run on the basis of what Alvison and Spicer call organizational stupidity. Things never change. Things absolutely never change. There's zero reflexivity. I'm being a bit hyperbolic now, but the point I'm making is true. People tend to toe the line, go along with things. There are people on the margins, as Newt said, in various ways, but nothing really changes. So I guess this kind of conversation, nothing's going to happen as a result. Nothing dramatic is going to change as a result of the change of government in the UK. And we'll still have these conversations and presentations in 10, 20 years' time, 30 years' time, by which time I'll be finito deceased. Well, the second point I want to make is to do with curriculum. This is picking up on a point Tim made. I'm thinking in terms of Eisner now, the explicit curriculum and the null curriculum. I used to teach psychiatrists when I ran an MSc in CBT and another one in mental health. And I found, this is my view, it's quite an extreme view, I suppose. People might see it as, but I think arrogance, professional arrogance, maybe tied up with what Chris has been talking about. Professional arrogance is tied into the curriculum, the explicit curriculum of psychiatric training. So you get this kind of sense of entitlement, this Orwellian, class consciousness that comes with the job. People are socialized into it. Also, curriculum control, the explicit curriculum that informs mental health nursing, which is policy following all the time. It's not critically led. So the explicit curriculum is always cancelled out by the service curriculum. So when people go from the university as student nurses to their practice placement, they'll be told things like, don't worry about all that fucking academic stuff you've been taught in the university. This is the way things are done here. So the service curriculum cancels out the explicit policy following curriculum of mental health nursing. So I just wanted to make these few points. Thank you very much. Great presentations.
Thanks, Alec. Did any of you want to speak back on
that point? I'd like to, the point you made, Alec, about the curriculum. Absolutely. Myself and a few colleagues at the University of Hull some years ago wrote a paper about our concerns. Students were coming to us telling us that they were struggling on placement, not with attaining any of the proficiencies that the Nursing and Midwifery Council wanted them to meet, not with their professional behaviour, which all seemed to be in order, but with this kind of unspoken agenda of fitting in.
Yep.
Doing as you're fucking told in that particular environment, speaking the same language as the people there. And it was more, that problem was, it was pronounced across a range of people, but it was more pronounced in people who were not native to the UK, people who were shyer, and people who were more open about their mental health experiences.
Right.
All of these things were like told to be buttoned down. Don't you be too confident, don't you be too quiet, don't question that. Or like Newt suggested, in the fullness of time, you'll become completely assimilated and you'll understand everything by not understanding it. So, yeah, I'm glad you brought that up. Thank you.
Thanks, Tim.
Okay, so we've got a few questions. We'll start with Rolf.
It's a comment. I have worked at the same hospital as Knut. I worked with the same patient as a psychologist. But my comment is on the Labour Party question, because in the beginning of 2000, things were happening in Norway. It's changed the name from psychiatry to mental health, and the recovery movement was starting. And there was a reaction from psychiatrists, but also my profession, psychologists. And a very sad marriage, I think, happened, that evidence-based methods became a concept, and then new public management comes into the arena. And the classical evidence-based mental health work fits very well with new public management because it's about standardization, about control, about documentation, and following rules. Now, we've had a Labour government in Norway the last 4 years or somewhere, yeah, and it hasn't changed anything. But the political discussion between the right and the left, between Labour Party and the Conservative Party in Norway, has been about for or against privatization. But when you look at how they implement, control organizations, they all believe in the market. So one of the reasons I don't think this changed is not only because psychiatry and now in Norway psychology, but it's this coupling with new public management and the idea that markets will solve everything. And I have a suspicion that the British Labour Party is also a market-oriented political party. So any decision in the Norwegian parliament, you will find that the right wing, the Labour Party and the Conservative support this way of running the business. So I think that we need more to focus on how market liberalism is running. And it really fits my profession, and it really fits psychiatrists. So no change without a real political change, I think.
I just wanted to make a point. Before this Conservative Labour Party got in Britain, there was the Jeremy Corbyn Momentum movement, and one of their policies was going to be a very sensible and quite sort of modest policy, which was to manufacture our own medication, not through private pharmaceutical corporations, but to manufacture our own, which would save a lot of cost. But still, there's that sort of it's predicated on the idea that you actually need all these drugs. But still, that was a shift, and that's one of the reasons I'm sure that Corbyn and Momentum had to go so strenuously, because private wealth was involved to shut it down. So it's a real difficulty.
Do you want to say? Okay.
Oh, thank you. Takes me a minute to get there.
Let's go.
Do another question.
Did say you. Is it Glenn?
Yeah.
And then if we've got time, we'll go to Chris and Gail.
Hi, I just wondered if you thought the diagnosis of the NHS was schizophrenic. And when I mean that is when in the original term of two minds, because at one hand it's saying you've got to hit targets, but on the other hand it says it's got limited resources. You can't do both. You've either got a target in which you're going to put all the resources against it, or you're going to say this is what we've got and you can do the best with it. But you can't say both at the same time. And so it's the diagnosis of the NHS that it's schizophrenic.
I think I'll pass on the UK stuff.
I'm not sure I want to enter into diagnostic language, but I think if you think about the other messaging that comes through the NHS, it's going to be entirely a person-centred culture, but it's based on genericized treatments. I mean, what we didn't say about NICE is not only did they review evidence and sort of look at what's supposed to be the most efficient, but cost is a major factor in deciding what's the best treatment. It's not just whether it works or not.
Okay, we've got 4 minutes left. So, Sally, I think you were trying to get in. If we could be fairly brief.
Hi everybody, sorry I'm not there. I just wanted to come back to the craft of autoethnography, and the questions that have just happened really were
indicating to me what autoethnography does so well is that it then stimulates those conversations. You know, all three of you gave it storytelling of examples. You know, when I'm teaching, you know, I'm already like, oh, we're going back to this recording because you just captured it so well. And I'm thinking, yeah, those three presentations, if they were at a psychiatry conference or, you know, a political conference, a bit like the post office storytelling here, you know, that's where you know, autoethnography can make such a difference. So I just really wanted to say thank you to all three of you, and all three of you, I've caught bits that I've written down. Tim, I did catch what you said there. Oh no, so it's called killing off the liveliness in others. And I thought, my God, that happens everywhere. That happens in academia. That happens for mental health nurses. It happens for nurses. It happens for students and working in a school of medicine when they go out there. That's what happens. It kills off the liveliness in others. And I think a conference like this hopefully helps the liveliness of others. So just wanted to say thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, we go to Chris. Yeah, probably.
This will be very quick. I just wanted to say, I wanted to talk about the writing. I thought the quality of the writing was just lovely, beautiful stuff. The organizational stupidity that Alec was talking about and the market solutions you were talking about, that infiltrated the States decades ago. We are screwed on that end. We don't have a national health service. We have pharmaceutical companies running everything, which led to opioids being dealt like candy and all kinds of people dying. What we did with our mental health service was we released them out into the streets during the Reagan administration. They're now homeless people all over. What I really wanted to say was, Knut, you delivered the line, he was a moron, like a real man. That was great.
We've got to just stick to the order, sorry. So we've just literally got a minute, Gail.
Thank you all. Wonderful, beautiful. I volunteer for a listening charity that supports people through crisis who may or may not have suicidal thoughts. And I've always been struck and horrified by the fact that people say, my GP said to ring you, the mental health team said to ring you, my psychiatrist said to ring you because I haven't got another appointment for 6 months or whatever, which I've always kind of thought was horrific. But kind of today, listening to you into this discussion, it's made me think, given that we give people a space to talk and we listen and we don't judge, even though we're not trained in the same way, maybe what we offer is as good or better.
Maybe in some cases it's some benefit in not being trained.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, as an early intervention practitioner, that was my primary tool, was a great big list of really strong working knowledge of third sector organisations, because I wanted people to get away from us. Not in a desk clearing sense, but in a, you need help and we just haven't got it, you know. Yeah, it's even that service, which at the time offered people a really extended, dedicated, small caseload-based intervention over a longer period of time to try and help them sort of make personal, meaningful recovery. It quite quickly became commodified, and the more it became genericized by NHS services, the less it meant. That's why I don't do it anymore. Yeah, but I think what you're doing is what we need more of. It's what we should all be doing, something like that.
Great, okay. I think we need to finish to allow some time to change over the rooms. I'd just like to show our appreciation for a great, inspiring start.